Okay, welcome to part 6 of the Fragger game. We're going to get tanks moving around by adding some input code to the tank class. But let's just look at what we got first, because we're going to do an extra before we start. Okay. When it runs eventually, it's chugging away. Right, what we've got is we can press F1 to change the number of players. We've got F2 that changes the level, but no matter what we're doing, we've got this title graphic, Fragger, across the screen. I don't really want that on when we're playing the game, because it's obviously obscuring things. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a subroutine like start title. So I'm in playgame.cs, so I'll go to there and find start title. Now I'll show you a quicker way of doing this. In this little window here, it should show all the subroutines you've got. Okay. In a module. So if you look at this box, it tells you what module you're in. So if I go into assets, oops, it always does that. It shows me Fragger assets, and even though this isn't very long, I can click that to find it quickly. Okay, so I'm in play game and I want to find start title, so I can find it on this list and select it and go to it. So I'm at start title. So in start title we've got a game state called title. Fair enough. Get rid of all the sprites and generate the title graphic, change the background colour, not that we see the background colour much, and then we do show level. So we want a similar subroutine for starting the game, but we don't want it to do this title graphic. So let's create a subroutine called public void start game. Okay, blank, and I'm going to copy everything that's in start title and put it in start game, and then I'm going to get rid of title graphic, so I'm not going to show that. Okay, the game state, I'm going to change that, and I'm going to make a new one called fragging, because that's what we're doing, we're playing the game. Now we can get it to create it for us, so if we right click on that and say generate field, it should create that state. So let's go and look at the definition of it. So I've right clicked on it and selecting go to definition. Now unfortunately it's made it a static, and we need to change it to a constant, and we need to give it a number as well. So I'm just going to give it the number 4. Okay, now I've set all my other ones up using capitals. So before we do anything else, let's just do F6, make sure this builds properly. Once it's built, we can change the name of this. So I'm going to put it as fragging, capital letters. This little red marker says, do you want me to update everything for you? So I can say rename fragging to fragging, and it'll change it in the code I've just written. Okay, remember, part of what these videos are for is to show you some of the tools that you've got in Visual Studio to help you. Okay, so let's go back to play game. So it's updated that for us. Right, we need some way of starting the game. So using the MAME keys, we're going to, in our input code, allow the user to press 1, okay, to start the game. But we're only going to allow this if we're in the game state title mode. So let's have a look at our check input so far. We've got the quick key, we've got the F2 for toggling the levels, and the F1 for cycling through the number of players. So I want to set up a few different things that I'm going to do when we're in gameplay mode and when we're in title mode. So I'm going to use a switch. So I'm inside check input. Okay. So I'm going to put a switch at the bottom, and I'm going to say check the game state. And I'm going to say if the state is title, then let's put a break in there. I'm going to check for the one key being pressed. So I'm going to say if input manager dot key pressed, and the one key is keys.d1. And the reason it's called D1 is because you've got numeric pads and they're numpad 1, so it's just to distinguish that. Okay, so if they press 1, I'm going to run start game. Okay, so all we've done is we've added a new state, and you can add as many states as you want for different modes that you want. So you might want high score display and things like that later on. In our input code, we check to see what state we're in, and we're saying if we're in title state, you do this key check. Okay, and that runs as a routine to start game. So let's just test that, see what it does. Right, so I'm going to press 1. Everything else gets displayed, and it doesn't put the name of the graphic, name of the level on the screen either. I can still press F1 and F2 to go back to the title mode, but as soon as I press 1, we're in gameplay. Okay. Okay, that's important because what I want to do is that if my game is active, so I'm back in input.cs and I'm back inside check input, and you can see there check input is highlighted because that's the subroutine I'm in. I'm going to do a case for fragging. Put my break in straight away so I don't forget to put that in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each active tank and I'm going to tell them to check their input. We haven't written this code yet, so we're going to do a little bit of magic. Now let's go back to play game and just look at this carefully. When we in show level create the tanks, we add them to this list called current players. Now we're going to go through that list in the input code. So if we go back to input and to our switch in our check input code, we're going to say, and we're going to use a different type of for loop now, we're going to use what's called a for each. So I'm going to say for each, all one word. Right, this works slightly different to a normal for loop where we have a variable and we set its start value, its stop value, and how much to increase. This one works with lists. Okay, and we say for each tank, because we've got a list of tanks, and I'm just going to call it T, in current players, was it? Yeah, in current players, do the following. Okay, so what it does is if we've got 3 tanks, it'll look at the first tank, call it T, and then we can like manipulate that tank. Then it'll loop round automatically to the next tank and then the final tank. It works out what the numbers are. It's quite handy. So we just need to say t.check input, which doesn't exist. So it should moan. But we can get it to create it for us. So we're going to say right click, generate method stub. And that's now in tank created that subroutine for us. So if we now go to the definition of that, you can see it's created it. We can get rid of the throw exception line, and then we can think about what we're going to do for our tank, okay, to check the input. Now at the moment we haven't got anything to do with bullets and things, so we're just going to worry about moving the tank around. Okay, so what we need to do is check for our keys. Now in tank, up the top, when we created the tank, we have set up some default keys for forward, reverse, left and right. And we set some speeds up, forward speed and reverse speed. And rotate speed. Once we've set this little part of the video up, you'll be able to experiment with those and try and get them to how you want them to be. You know, faster, slower, whatever. Okay. So, in our check input, that's what we need to look for. So we need to say, let's do left and right rotate first. So we can say if gm dot input manager gm.key down. So we say key down this time. So as if we hold the key down, we want it to carry on rotating. And we've called the key that we're going to use for left. Okay, so let's just scroll up again just to show that. We set up these keys, left, reverse, forward and right. And we set them with a value. So these are variables, and we've set them with some default values. Okay, so if we get that, what we want to do is rotate. We haven't got a subroutine called rotate. Okay, if I press enter now, it's going to select rotate speed, which is not what I wanted. So I'm going to say rotate, then I'm going to press escape to get rid of that little picker. And the rotate is going to be our, was it turn speed or rotate speed? Rotate speed. Okay, so I'm going to run a subroutine called rotate, and I'm going to have a parameter that gives it the rotate speed. This doesn't exist. So I'm going to right click on rotate, and I'm going to say generate method stub. And it creates it for me, quite nice of it, I think. Okay. Now, one thing you need to understand, the game is constantly running. Okay, and if we go back to our gm.cs file, our main game file, there is a subroutine called update. It runs two subroutines, check input and game loop. These will run many times a second. By default, the game engine runs at 100 frames a second for the updates. Okay, so we're going to check for the keys being pressed 100 times a second. What we've got to be careful is we want to move or rotate at a certain amount of degrees every second. Okay, but if we're going to do this 100 times a second, then we've got to take that into account. So if we go back to tank, if we was to just add on the rotate speed, so I could write this. So in my rotate subroutine, I'm going to say tank dot rotation angle plus equals, remember that just means add on to whatever's already in rotation angle, my rotate speed, so the parameter that we got given. Okay, so I could do that. I'm going to run this and show you what happens. So I've only programmed the left key so far, so that's the only one that's going to work. Right, if I'm pressing left now, but we're in title mode, so I have to press 1 to go into think about. Oh, look how fast it's rotating. That's ridiculous. Okay, that's actually because the rotation, let's just have a look. What we set the rotation speed at 90, which was supposed to be 90 degrees per second. Alright, but we're actually doing that 100 times a second, so that's 90 times 100, so it's actually rotating 9,000 degrees every second. Slightly too fast. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to ask the event manager, which we get at by saying gm.eventManager, to turn our number into a value per second. So we say get value per second of the rotation speed and add that on. So what the event manager does, it keeps track of how fast everything's running. So it'll take our number and it divides it, okay, and gives us a fraction for the portion of the second that we have currently been running our game for. Okay, just take it at face value for now. If you want a deeper explanation than that, come and ask me and I'll tell you that. Okay, right, so let's just try that again now and let's see if it looks a bit more sensible. Remember, we put the number 90 in our little variable for the speed this tank turns. So I'll press 1 to start it off, and there you go. And if you time it, it probably takes 4 seconds to get the whole way around. Remember, there's 360 degrees in a full turn. The other thing, it's actually going the wrong way. I would expect left to go anti-clockwise. So let's fix that. And all we need to do to fix that in the input code for the tank is put minus rotate speed. Okay, I'm going to do the right turn by copying everything for the left one and getting rid of the little minus. So I'm running the same subroutine rotate. I haven't had to write a new one. So I'm checking the right key and rotating. So let's just run that. We should have left and right rotation working. Hopefully. Left, now fixed, and right. Let's add all 4 tanks. Remember, we've left the default key, so they're all being controlled in the same way. So they all like little, ooh, you can do a little dance. Oh, la 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 la, we are the tanks. They had a bit of episode there. Okay, let's get these tanks moving backwards and forwards before I go totally do lolly. Right. Again, we're gonna say if, so we're in check input of tank, access the input manager and say if, and again we're going to do key down because if we're holding down up we want to keep going forward. So we're going to use our forward key, yep, forward. If that's active, we're going to move the tank. So we're going to create a subroutine called move, and the amount we're going to move is the forward speed. Yeah, forward speed I called it, the variable. Again, move doesn't exist, so let's create that. So right click, generate method stub. Now I'm going to load up paint now because I want to do a diagram of what we've got to do. So I'm just going to load paint. I only loaded paint because it's the quickest thing to load. It takes no time. There you go. Right. Got to do a bit of maths. Let me just draw a tank. Here we go. Eric doing his brilliant drawing. Right, here's a tank. When we rotate it, it's a rotated tank. When we push forward, we'd expect to go in that direction. When we're facing up, we'd expect to go in that direction. If we're facing down, let me draw a tank going the other way. In fact, these are quite superb pictures. We'd expect to go in that direction. Okay. Now, what we need is, based on the rotation of the sprite, we need to know the direction. And when I say direction, I actually mean a vector. So that is a line from the center of the sprite pointing in the same direction, like that the tank is facing. So in each one of these instances we need to work that out. That's actually quite complicated, but luckily I've written some little helpers to do this for us. And what we specifically want is what we call a unit vector. Now those of you doing maths that might have done this will know that a unit vector has a length of 1. Okay. And in our case 1 pixel. But it still has a direction. And what we can then do is multiply our speed by that unit vector. Yeah. Sorry if I've scared anyone who doesn't like maths that much. It wasn't a prerequisite that we're doing A-level maths or double maths or anything like that. Okay, but there's a brilliant diagram in Paint to illustrate the unit vector. Okay, so let's have a look at how we get that in code, and then you'll see it's ridiculously simple in the end because I wrote a complicated thing to do it. Okay, back to our code then. So we need to get hold of this direction first. So we're going to say, and it comes as a vector 3, so that's a 3-dimensional direction vector. But don't worry about that. We're only messing about with the X and Y. It's just how it comes. So I'm going to create a variable called, and it's a local variable that only exists in this move subroutine. And I'm going to ask my friend, the rotation helper, so type in that, I'm going to say get my direction. So it looks for us. So we want to say get the direction of my tank, and don't do any extra rotation. I won't explain what that is. You sometimes need to do that if you're doing weird things. Okay, but essentially what that'll do is it'll look at the sprite, look at the angle it's rotated at, and it'll make a direction vector. And we can now use that directly to alter the position of the tank. And again, because we're doing this 100 times a second, what we're going to do is we're going to use the event manager. Again, just like we did with the rotate code. So we're going to say alter my position, add on gm.event-manager. So this bit's going to be exactly the same as before. Value per second. Now this time it is our forward speed. I'm going to change the name of that in a minute. And I'm going to times that number by that direction vector, that unit vector we've got. Okay. Don't worry too much about the maths. It's not a maths exercise as such. We just take that works. Before we go on, I'm going to use this move thing for the reverse as well. So forward speed is a crap name that is picked for that. So I'm just going to call it speed instead. Okay, so let's just rename the parameter to speed. And obviously we need to rename that as well. Okay, so we get our direction, our unit vector, and then we just multiply that by the speed, well, a fraction of the speed from what the event manager says to us, and we update the position. So let's just see if that works. So we've got forward going. Hopefully it'll work. As long as I haven't gone on my 2 gig limit on this video, which I'm probably rapidly approaching. Right, press 1. Rotate, go forward. Woohoo! Rotate, go forward. Oh, it's like line dancing. Let's go back and put all 4 tanks on. Press 1. Rotate. Woo! Oh, they've gone off screen. How horrendous is that? So we could do a little bit of a jig. Let's get reverse going and I'll wrap this video up. So reverse, exactly the same. If GM input manager, key down, reverse key, reverse, there it is. And then we want to do move, but this time we're going to do our reverse speed. But reverse speed we want to be in the opposite direction. And the awesome thing about unit vectors is if we multiply them by a negative value, we get the opposite direction. So we can just put minus reverse speed. Don't have to write any more code. Let's prove that works, and then I'll end this video with a little dance of tanks. Like you do. Right, let's put all the tanks on F1. Press 1 to come into game mode. Let's try reverse. Remember, reverse was slower, so you might have to want to play with that. You might think, oh, that's ridiculously slow. Oh, look, they're moonwalking. That's my Michael Jackson impression. Pretty poor. But that was really tragic. That's nearly as tragic as that Street Fighter the movie that I mentioned in another video. But hey, I'm allowed to be tragic on this occasion. Okay, right, the next video we're going to make it so we got independent controls, because it's a bit ridiculous. Everyone's moving with the same controls, and we need to stop that happening. We want to stop when we get to the walls, otherwise it's going to be the worst maze game. It'd be as bad as the one that Chris Piper was doing, where you could cheat. Sorry, Chris. Okay, that'll do.